Recently, as you well know if you've been watching my channel, I made a video in which I expressed many of the impressions Big Sister had when she played A Plague Tale Requiem, which were very bad ones. In that video I also expressed that I consider Innocence a better game because its allegories are universal, while Requiem individualizes its story and characters and, in my opinion, not in the best way. A few days ago, the Tuubster, another fellow YouTuber, and one with whom I've had a few chats in other videos of mine, asked me an interesting question. Do you know what allegorical storytelling is? How metaphors work in such a story? Well, truth be told, the question is kind of vague, so the answer won't always hit the mark, but in any case, I found the question interesting, because he was most probably referring to that part at the ending of the other video, in which I trash talk Requiem by saying that its story is not as universal as the first game, and therefore not as relatable. That question made me ask myself a question. What substantial allegories does Requiem present from which we can gather meaningful morals? I pondered for a while, and when I had an answer, I started writing the reply. However, the reply turned out to be so long I thought it better to make a video instead, which is more palatable than a 7 pages long reply. So here we go. First and foremost, when it comes to allegories, we have to be aware of one important detail. Allegorical stories are one half what the author intended to tell with his story, and the other half what the reader perceives from it. It is also worth mentioning that the perspective of the reader can change depending on time and context. How the readers of today perceive stories now is different to how the readers of tomorrow will perceive those same stories in the future. That way, one story can mean 1,000 things to 1,000 readers. What I express in my videos is my own personal opinion. It is not meant to challenge the views of others. It is simply an opinion, and it is as valid as any other. That being said, your question is a good one, and one that I've given much thought. To be honest, I didn't like Requiem, but if I were to point out its most significant allegory, I would say this. Requiem is allegorical to how people fail when they renounce who they are. The best example is Amicia, who failed in this second game because she forgets her importance as Hugo's sister, turning more into a warrior instead. She succeeds in the first game because she is a sister first and a warrior second. Anybody can be a warrior, and when it comes to that, there are plenty of other characters better suited for combat than Amicia. For that reason alone, characters like Arno would be a better guardian for Hugo, or Kratos, like Big Sister suggested, or Joel Miller. All of these are bigger, stronger, savvier warriors with a lot more self-control than Amicia, but still, they wouldn't be enough for Hugo because none of them are Hugo's big sister. That is why Amicia is so important, because she is the only sister Hugo has, and after Beatrice's death, the only family he has left. Now that we mention her, see the character of Beatrice, who was a positive influence to both children in the first game, and in the second she renounces her responsibilities as the mother of the family and entrusts Hugo to Vaudin and the alchemist instead. The de Rune family in this second game is the perfect allegory to a dysfunctional family. Vaudin is the abusive stepfather, Beatrice the submissive mother that looks away while the stepfather abuses her son, and Amicia is the troubled teen that means well, but her own personal war against the world prevents her from providing the best protection for her brother, and as such, ends up doing him more harm than good. And all of this is narrowed down to one very important moral, that in order for Hugo to get better, the mother and the sister had to provide him with stability and the love of a family. This is very similar to what Innocence portrays. It is after Hugo reunites the little family he had left that the plague ends in that first game. So yes, Requiem is a very significant story in its own right, filled with its own allegories and morals. But the problem with Requiem, and the reason why I criticize it so much, is that its allegories can contradict the ones of Innocence. Both Innocence and Requiem are powerful stories in their own right, but each would be better if they were separate rather than in the same continuity. In my own personal opinion, Requiem would have been a better and possibly more successful game had it been the story of Aelia and Basilius, and not a follow-up to Amicia and Hugo's own story, because Innocence expresses its morals more than well in its own style, and Requiem could have done the same, but by being a sequel, then it falls on the debate of whether the game is accurate and faithful to its predecessor or not. Some people can insist that the game is the natural evolution to Innocence, and they might well be right, but those that believe otherwise can also be correct, and therefore we have a debate without solution when people, instead, could be enjoying both games for what each one expresses and teaches. Requiem, the way that it is, would be better if it had had different characters. It would have kept the story more clean, without affecting the first game, and with less room for controversies, shining more on its own merits because in the end, as I've already said, the game delivers a very similar message of motherhood, sisterhood, and family to the one that was communicated in the first game, only that this is the story of the protector that failed because she didn't understand what her brother needed of her, and not the protector that succeeded because she always understood the role she had to play in the life of her kid brother. Truth be told, it was hard for me to recognize Amicia and Beatriz in the second game, not only because they look different, but because of how they behave and treat Hugo. I cannot help but feel that the second game contradicts the first one by portraying Beatriz so willing to hand her son over to the alchemists, when in the first game she raised and looked after him for nearly 5 years on her own. The same goes for Amicia. It is hard for me to believe that Amicia, at the ending, would just give up on her brother and turn off the lights when she, in the first game, literally ran through rats to reach him. The Amicia of the first game would have never given up on her brother, no matter what Beatriz or Vaudan, or Hugo himself, tells her. That persistence is much of what inspires Hugo's redemption in the first game. What is a protector, if not one that protects you from everything, including yourself? But no. Hugo gives up on life and Amicia, Hugo's guide and guardian, follows his lead. In A Plague Tale Innocence, Amicia and Beatriz inspire Hugo in very positive ways, and it burned me that in the second, they portray the mother and sister as the main focus of Hugo's downfall, because that is exactly what happened in that second game. The macula spreads within Hugo's blood because his mother betrays him to the Order, and the macula takes complete control of Hugo because he thought his sister had died. Amicia wouldn't have died, and therefore induced the decadence of her brother, had she been more careful, had she been less warrior and more sister. I didn't like that shift in the character. If you've seen this video, you will hear me commend the first game for not reducing Amicia and her role as a big sister to just fighting and killing people. Fraternal love is not as relevant in this second game, and the most obvious example is the respective climaxes of each game. At the ending of the second, Hugo crosses the third threshold, and Amicia is completely unable to reach him, which once again is hard to believe because she could reach him well enough in the first game. Some people might argue that this is the third threshold and not the first one. And yes, it is true, but Hugo in the first threshold in the first game looked worse Then he looks in the third threshold of the second game. Observe that Hugo's expression is blank, his eyes dilated. The macula has fed within him for so long now that he looks more rat than man. This is because he spent a whole month in prison with his mother, being tortured by Vitalis so the macula can spread within him. Only God knows how many people he had to kill with the rats, so Vitalis wouldn't kill his mother. A month later, his will is broken, and he follows Lord Nicholas without question, invading the house he once cherished and flooding it with rats. Amicia, however, doesn't back down and confronts Hugo. Hugo, who is angry because she hid from him the fact that Mother was alive, and very well blames his sister for all the atrocities he had to do to defend his mother, lashes out at her, showing, however, his first signs of humanity through anger. Amicia begs to be forgiven, but Hugo's anger is taking the best from him. Even so, Amicia's love is stronger than any fear, and she runs through rats to reach him. She embraces him, and Hugo yields to their fraternal bond, letting go of the anger and permitting her love to heal his pain. The rats dissipate, leaving the two siblings intact, and we see that Hugo, for the first time in a long while, is happy and feeling safe within the embrace of his sister. We see a fulfilled little boy that has found peace again. Stronger together, the Darun siblings then face off and defeat Nicholas, and afterwards defeat Vitalis and save their mother. This story was perfect. I'm sorry I said it, but it is. But then the second game wants us to believe that this Amicia, who brought Hugo back from this very dark moment, is unable to bring back Hugo at the ending of the second. The only reason why Hugo flips is because he thought that Amicia had died. But how much time passed between her apparent death to the moment they meet again? Not much. Why? Because Amicia wakes up soon after, when Arno is bandaging her wound. So Hugo spends a few hours thinking his sister is dead, and within those few hours he flips worse than he flipped in the first game after being captured and tortured for an entire month? I'm sorry guys, but that doesn't make sense. Even worse than that is that Amicia's love in this second game is not enough to bring him back, and I wonder why, because Hugo looks well enough, and certainly better than he looked in the first game, in which she manages to pull him back. This Hugo in the second game, in which he is supposedly too far gone, comes and embraces her, then talks quietly, lovingly. He is not reproaching his sister in any way, walks with her, and rationally explains to her that she has to kill him so the plague ends, because that's how it is this second time around. And Amicia, you know, the same woman that literally ran through rats to reach her brother in the first game, all of a sudden is submissive, and she gives up. She turns off the scones and accepts that her only reason for existing is to throw a rock at her kid brother's head. Even worse than that, when she encounters Hugo, crucified to a tree, she doesn't even try to untie him, to talk to him, to pat him on the face and see if he responds. No, she just swings her sling and bashes his head. I'm sorry guys, but the Amicia of the first game wouldn't have done that. She would have untied her brother. She would have wrapped him tightly in blankets, and she would have sailed with catatonic Hugo, Lucas and Sophia away from that place and into the house on top of the mountain. The Amicia of the first game would have given us another beautiful ending, and this one in similar fashion to Stephen King's It. No, not the new version, the old one. I can visualize that ending so well. The Amicia of Innocence is on a swing chair with catatonic Hugo, the swing chair she had promised him in the pilgrim's camp on what seems a long time ago. Each morning, she would swing with him under the tree, and at night, she would put him to bed and sing their lullaby. Eventually, Lucas would tell her that Hugo is not responding, and that she has to do something else with her life. But she knows her brother is still there, and she persists, until one day his little hand squeezes hers and his eyes fill with the clarity of consciousness. The macula marks long gone from his face, and perhaps for the last time. Once again, Amicia's love and endless faith in her brother being the focus of his redemption and survival. This is my theory on how the Amicia of Innocence would have handled the ending of Requiem, but maybe I'm incorrect and Amicia naturally transformed from this person to this person. In the end, all of the morals that Requiem portray make complete sense and make for a very powerful story, but it would certainly have been appreciated more by more people had they used other characters and not Amicia and Hugo. I'm sure that the ones that like Requiem as it is would have liked it that other way, with Aelia and Basilius as well, and people like me would have been able to appreciate this sequel more had it been done that other way. After all, prequel stories tend to end badly, and a king, for as long as profound as his story gets to be in the prequel trilogy, must become Darth Vader in the end, so Aelia and Basilius, for as likable as they can get to be, must suffer, die, and incite the Justinian plague, so the characters from Innocence can learn from them and do things better consequently. A Plague Tale Requiem would have worked better that way, and by leaving Amicia and Hugo's story from the first game intact, the series, therefore, would have had the element of comparison within its own narrative. We can compare and analyze both games and their differences already as it is, but we will always have the element of discrepancies and the endless debates that are impossible to reconcile. In simple words, we have yet another divided fanbase, the last thing this world needs. In any case, Tuubster, thanks for your reply. It was nice talking to you again. This is the type of community that I want for my channel. Rational people that can argue intelligently and inspire one another mentally. So thank you once more. I'm looking forward to hearing from you again, but until then, stay safe.